The mountain rose above the Colorado wilderness like a wall against the sky, its jagged ridges cut through drifting clouds. Its slopes streaked with snow and shadow. Locals knew it well. A peak both admired and feared. Some called it breathtaking, others unforgiving. For climbers, it was a test of endurance. For Daniel Reeves, it was a challenge he believed he was ready for. Daniel was 34 years old. To most people, he was just another outdoorsman. But within the climbing community, he carried a reputation. He was careful, methodical, the kind of man who checked his knots twice and studied maps long after others had gone to bed. Friends called him ambitious but grounded, a mountaineer who respected the dangers of the peaks, but who still sought to conquer them. He had summited mountains across the Rockies, trekked through ranges in South America, even guided amateur climbers on weekend expeditions. Yet, for all his experience, Daniel was private. He climbed often alone, believing solitude gave him clarity. "It's the mountain and me," he once told his sister. "No distractions, no noise, just trust in myself." She worried about him, as any sister would, but she also admired his determination. The climb that would seal his fate began like any other. In early September, he drove to the trailhead of a remote Colorado peak known for its unpredictable weather and avalanche-prone ridges. The route was long and dangerous, but Daniel had studied it carefully. He packed food for 4 days, rope, ice axes, crampons, and his climbing journal. Before losing reception, he sent his sister a short text, "Back by Sunday." It was the last message she ever received. That morning, other hikers remembered seeing him. He was spotted on the lower ridge, his pack heavy but balanced, his stride steady. They recalled how he nodded politely. Though he didn't linger to chat, he was focused, determined, as if the mountain ahead consumed his full attention. By late afternoon, weather began to shift. Clouds rolled in faster than expected, winds rising with sudden force. In Colorado, storms could form in minutes, turning clear skies into maelstrom of snow and sleet. Witnesses later recalled seeing Daniel higher on the slope as the storm descended, moving toward a ledge before the mountain swallowed him in mist. When he did not return by Sunday, his sister raised the alarm. She knew Daniel too well. He was cautious, never reckless with his time. If he said Sunday, he meant Sunday. By Monday morning, search teams were deployed. Helicopters thudded through the skies, circling the ridges. From above, rescuers scanned the slopes, peering into crevasses and avalanche chutes. Dogs were brought in to sniff for scents along the base, trained to detect even faint traces of human presence beneath snow. Dozens of volunteers joined the effort, including fellow climbers who respected Daniel and wanted to bring him home. For days, they searched. They combed narrow gullies with avalanche probes, stabbing into snow and ice, hoping for the smallest sign. Experienced mountaineers scaled sheer rock faces to peer into hidden alcoves. But each lead ended the same: silence. Not a boot print, not a torn scrap of clothing, not a rope trailing down a cliff. Nothing. Searchers widened their radius, scouring miles beyond his planned route. Still, the mountain gave no answers. One pilot described the scene from above: endless white, broken only by sharp ridges of black stone, as if the earth itself wanted to hide its secrets. Each evening, the teams returned exhausted, frostbitten, and empty-handed. His sister remained at the base camp, clutching her phone, hoping it might ring, hoping Daniel might emerge from the mist with that same steady stride. But he never did. As days stretched into a week, hope grew thin. Storms battered the slopes again, erasing tracks, filling crevasses, covering evidence that might have been there. Even the dogs grew restless, pacing in circles, unable to find a clear trail. Theories surfaced quickly. Some believed Daniel had slipped into a hidden crevasse, his body entombed in ice where no one could reach him. Others suspected an avalanche had buried him beneath tons of snow, his remains sealed away until thaw. To some, it was simple. The mountain had claimed him, as it had claimed many before. But to those who knew Daniel, the silence was harder to accept. He was skilled, Cautious, disciplined, he left behind no trail, no sign of struggle, no trace at all for an experienced climber. Disappearance without evidence was unusual, even uncanny, after 10 days. The official search was suspended, helicopters were recalled, volunteers returned home. The mountain stood silent again, its ridges untouched by human presence. For Daniel's family, the void was unbearable. His sister refused to believe he was simply gone. She kept his cabin room preserved exactly as he had left it, climbing gear neatly stacked, boots by the door, maps pinned to the wall. Every detail remained, as though he might walk through the door and need them again. But months passed, then years. His name was added to the long list of mountaineers lost to the peaks. His sister kept his story alive, organizing vigils, reminding others of his careful nature, refusing to let the silence erase him. And yet, the mountain kept its secrets. Searchers had found no evidence of a fall, no remains, no scattered belongings. The storm had come and gone, and with it, Daniel Reeves had vanished as though he had never climbed at all. It was as if the mountain had swallowed him whole. The first weeks after Daniel Reeves disappeared were marked by chaos and disbelief. His sister refused to leave the base of the mountain, standing beneath its looming shadow, her eyes fixed on the ridges as if willing him to come back down. When search teams finally left, she stayed. When journalists packed up and went home, she stayed. Even when snow blanketed the trailheads and winter sealed the peak in ice, she returned. She could not accept the silence. Each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, she organized vigils. Climbers from across the state came, some carrying candles, others carrying climbing ropes as symbols of solidarity. They stood in a circle at the trailhead, their breath fogging in the cold night air, speaking his name into the dark. His sister placed his helmet at the center of the gathering, a silent reminder that he had been more than a statistic, more than a headline. He had been her brother. The community built memorials in his honor at the local climbing gym. His gear was displayed on the wall, his ice axe, his ropes, his weather-beaten pack. Visitors paused before it, whispering prayers or simply staring, lost in thought. For newcomers, his name became legend. For those who had known him, it was an open wound. But as time passed, grief began to transform into theories. People cannot live long with questions unanswered. Some insisted the explanation was simple. Daniel had fallen into a crevasse, one of the many that lay hidden beneath the snowfields. A single misstep, a crack opening beneath his boots, and the mountain would have swallowed him without a sound. His body would remain locked in ice for decades, maybe centuries, only to emerge someday when the glacier shifted. Others swore it had been an avalanche. The storm that night had unleashed tons of snow down the ridges. Perhaps Daniel had been caught in it, buried under layers so deep no probe could reach. Avalanche victims don't always leave evidence, one rescuer explained. Sometimes the mountain just covers everything. Yet even these natural explanations failed to quiet the doubts. Daniel had been experienced, cautious, the kind of climber who studied conditions carefully. For him to vanish without leaving even a trace seemed strange. Some began to whisper darker possibilities. Had he staged his own disappearance? The idea unsettled his family, but whispers persisted. Maybe he had debts. Maybe he had grown tired of his life and chosen the mountains as a place to vanish. Skeptics pointed to rare cases where climbers walked away deliberately, shedding identities like old skin. To them, it was possible Daniel had done the same, but locals told a different story. Over time, the mountain itself grew a reputation. People began to call it the Silent Peak. It became a place where voices dropped, where even experienced climbers admitted to unease. Legends spread quickly. The peak had always taken those who challenged it. Some claimed to hear whispers on the wind when they camped nearby. Others said the air grew heavy on its slopes, as though the mountain was alive and watching. The disappearance of Daniel Reeves was not the first, they pointed out, and it would not be the last. And so myth and memory fused together. To the climbing community, Daniel was a cautionary tale. To the locals, He became proof that the silent peak did not forgive those who trespassed. The internet only magnified the mystery. Online forums dedicated to unsolved cases latched onto his story. Threads stretched for hundreds of comments, debating every possibility. Some users mapped his last known route, calculating how far he could have traveled before the storm. Others claimed foul play, that another climber might have followed him and silenced him. More imaginative voices suggested survival, that he had found shelter in caves, living like a ghost on the mountain, waiting for a chance to return. And then came the supernatural theories. Posters insisted Daniel had been taken by forces older than the mountain itself. Some claimed the stone circles hikers sometimes photographed were not natural formations, but remnants of rituals, markers of something hidden. Others swore his disappearance fit patterns of vanishings across mountain ranges worldwide, people who went missing without trace, as though the earth itself had opened and swallowed them whole. The speculation grew so intense that his name became a fixture in mystery podcasts, YouTube videos, and articles about vanishings. To strangers, Daniel Reeves was a riddle to solve. To his sister, he was still her brother, still missing. Her grief never softened. She kept his cabin room exactly as he had left it. The boots by the door, the folded maps on his desk, the climbing harness draped over the chair. Each item was a frozen moment, a pause button on a life that had been interrupted. She dusted the room, but never changed it, as though Daniel might walk in at any moment, shrug on his jacket, and head out again. The cabin became a sanctuary of memory, but also a prison. Friends begged her to let go, to move forward. She couldn't. How do you move forward when the mountain gives no answers, when silence is the only thing that speaks? Over the years, more climbers attempted the silent peak, drawn by its reputation. Some returned shaken, claiming they had felt watched all night, their campfires sputtering without cause. Others swore their compasses spun wildly near certain ridges. A few insisted they had seen figures on the cliffs, shadows that vanished when approached, but no one found Daniel for 12 years. The mountain remained mute. It gave back no rope, no helmet, no trace of the climber who had walked into its storm. Theories piled up, myths deepened, grief lingered, and then, at last, technology succeeded where human eyes had failed. For years, the peak gave no answers, until technology looked where human eyes never could. For more than a decade, the silent peak remained unchanged. Its slopes endured storms, avalanches, and seasons of thaw and freeze. Daniel Reeves's name lived on in vigils and whispers. But the mountain kept its silence. Families stopped climbing there, search parties ended, and even journalists lost interest. It seemed the peak would never give an answer. Then technology went where human eyes could not. It began quietly, not with professional investigators, but with hobbyists. A small group of drone enthusiasts had made it their weekend ritual to explore difficult terrain, flying cameras into ravines and ridges that hikers would never reach. For them, it was adventure at a distance, the thrill of seeing wilderness from angles once impossible. One autumn, 12 years after Daniel vanished, they brought their drones to the slopes of the silent peak. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual: wide sweeps of alpine meadows, ridges dusted with early snow, the skeletal remains of old avalanches scattered like scars. But one operator, guiding his drone into a newly exposed section of rockfall, saw something strange. The landslide from the past winter had opened a gash in the slope, a narrow crevice hidden for years beneath ice and stone. As the drone tilted into the shadows, its camera caught a glimpse of shapes wedged deep inside. At first, they looked like scraps of fabric, meaningless debris, but as the drone's light adjusted, the image sharpened: a coil of climbing rope, frayed and frozen into the ice, the torn strap of a backpack, half buried in snow. The operator's voice cracked on the recording. "Wait, that's gear." The footage was shared online within hours. Locals recognized the brand of rope Daniel had favored, the color of the pack he had carried. Suddenly, interest in the case reignited. Searchers who had once given up returned to the mountain, this time guided not by instinct or maps, but by the eye of a drone. Within days, a recovery team scaled the slope. It was dangerous ground, loose stone, shifting snow, the kind of terrain that swallowed climbers whole, but wedged in the ice. They found what the drone had seen, a torn backpack, faded and stiff from years of exposure, caught between boulders like an offering. They brought it down carefully, treating it not as evidence alone, but as the last possession of a man long lost. The bag was damaged, seams ripped, fabric shredded, but much inside had survived. The first item pulled from the pack was a laminated ID card. The photo was unmistakable. Daniel Reeves, his name, his face, his signature, undeniable proof that the backpack had been his. Next came a small journal. The cover was stiff with water damage, but pages inside were still legible. They were filled with Daniel's handwriting, neat at first, then shakier at the time of the discovery. No one knew what the words contained. That truth would come later. There was also a camera, its casing cracked, but the memory card intact. Investigators restored the images and released them cautiously. The photos began like any climber's album, shots of ridges, of snowfields gleaming in the sun, of the view looking back toward the valley. There were even selfies. Daniel smiling, wind biting at his face, confidence shining in his eyes. But as the series progressed, the mood shifted. Later frames showed his camp at dusk, the tent half covered in snow, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the ground. Then came night images, grainy and blurred, streaks of light where stars should have been, strange distortions in the sky. And then, the final image, it showed Daniel's campfire, small and flickering. The edge of his tent glowed faintly in the light, but above, on the ridge, a dark shape loomed. Its outline was unmistakable, tall, upright, human-like, too far to see a face, too blurred to identify, yet impossible to dismiss as rock or shadow. Investigators argued endlessly about the photograph. Some said it was a trick of light, a boulder caught at just the right angle. Others insisted it was too deliberate, too shaped. Those who saw it in person admitted quietly that it felt wrong, less like coincidence, more like presence. The revelation shook Daniel's sister most of all. She had prayed for evidence, but not like this. Not a bag torn by ice, not a shadow burned into memory. She clutched the journal when it was handed to her, tears streaking her face, whispering her brother's name as if he might answer. The community split once again. Skeptics declared the figure was pareidolia, the human tendency to see shapes where none existed. Believers whispered that Daniel had not been alone on the mountain, that something had watched him, maybe even followed him, until he vanished. But the greatest shock was not in the photo, or even in the fragments of rope. It was in the journal, hidden in the heart of the pack. Its pages carried Daniel's last words, his thoughts scrawled in moments no one else had witnessed. And what he wrote inside would reveal something no one expected. But it was the journal inside the pack that revealed something no one expected. The journal found inside Daniel Reeves's backpack was damaged, but still legible. Some pages were blurred by water, the ink smudged into ghostly stains, but others remained sharp, as though the words had been waiting years to be read. Investigators and family alike hoped for clarity. What they found instead were fragments of unease, the unraveling of a man who seemed to know he was not alone. The first entries were steady. Daniel noted his progress, the weather, the altitude. His handwriting was firm, each line precise. But within days, the tone shifted. The words grew shorter, more hurried. The pen strokes uneven. One entry read, "Voices carried on the wind last night. Thought it was echo, but too clear. Heard my name. No one here but me." Another, written the following evening, "Lights above Treeline, not stars, moving like lanterns. No explanation. Watched for an hour, still there when I closed my eyes." By the third entry, the words were darker. "Not alone up here." The pages painted a picture of a climber unsettled by more than weather. Daniel described how the air seemed heavier as he climbed higher, how silence pressed against him until even his own breath sounded intrusive. He admitted he woke often at night, convinced something was pacing outside his tent. Footsteps, he scrawled. Too slow, too heavy to be deer. Stopped when I looked. But the most disturbing account came midway through the journal. Daniel wrote of stumbling upon something unusual near the summit, a circle of stones. At first, he assumed it was an old fire ring left by previous climbers. But the formation was too precise. The stones arranged upright, evenly spaced. Snow had gathered inside the ring, untouched by wind. He drew a rough sketch of it in the margins. The drawing showed a perfect circle, unnatural in a place where the mountain rarely allowed symmetry. Not weather-made, he wrote. Feels wrong, as if waiting for something. Forensic teams studied the journal and the state of the backpack. What struck them most was how well-preserved it was. Yes, the fabric was frayed, but the damage was not consistent with 12 years of constant exposure. Instead, it looked as though the bag had been protected, sheltered somewhere before being released by the landslide. That detail unsettled investigators. If the pack had been hidden, then who, or what, had placed it there? Encouraged by Caleb's account and the drone discovery, search teams returned to the ridge where the backpack had been found. This time, they looked beyond the obvious. What they uncovered seemed to echo Daniel's own notes. Near a windswept ridge, they discovered blackened stone fire pits. Not one, but several, scattered across areas far too remote for casual climbers. Some were filled with layers of ash. Others had soot stains rising up the rock walls behind them. Their placement suggested they had been used repeatedly by someone or something that had stayed long enough to need warmth and light. More disturbing still were the carvings. Chiseled into flat rock faces were markings. Crude, humanoid shapes with elongated limbs. Etched with jagged precision. The images were weathered. Yes, but not ancient. Some cuts were sharp, their edges still white where stone had been split. Whoever had made them had done so not long ago. The findings raised more questions than they answered. If Daniel had created the carvings, why? To mark his presence? To leave behind a message? But if not him, then who else had been there in the years since his disappearance? Analysis of the journal suggested something else, too. Daniel had lived longer than the community believed. His entries continued for days after the storm that searchers thought had claimed him. His last dated note was written nearly a week later. Still here? Can't find way down. Lights returned last night. Voices closer. Heard one say, "Stay." Those words were circled, underlined, as if he wanted whoever found the journal to understand. The implications were devastating. It meant Daniel had survived the storm, perhaps even had a chance to return. Yet something, fear, disorientation, or something stranger, had kept him trapped. Theories spiraled once more. Some argued Daniel had suffered altitude sickness, a condition known to warp perception, to make climbers hallucinate. Perhaps the voices and lights were illusions of a starving, oxygen-deprived mind. The carvings could have been his own, etched during delirium. The fire pits his attempts to survive, but others rejected that explanation. The preservation of the backpack, the freshness of the carvings, the ash in the pits. They suggested more than one presence. They hinted that Daniel had encountered something hidden in the mountain, something that had been there before him and perhaps long after. His sister clung to the journal as though it were a lifeline to her. It was proof that he had fought, that he had survived for days, that he had not given up. But the words haunted her too, especially his repeated phrase, "Not alone up here," for climbers who read the entries. The effect was chilling. They knew the solitude of high peaks, the thin air, the oppressive silence. But Daniel's notes described something more, something that watched, something that whispered. Investigators tried to present the findings carefully, framing them as the writings of a man under extreme duress. But no phrasing could blunt the fear that spread. People began to speak of the silent peak not just as dangerous, but as cursed, a place where the mountain itself was inhabited by something unseen. And so the mystery deepened. The backpack, the carvings, the fire pits. and the journal entries painted a picture that no one could agree upon. Had Daniel Reeves uncovered something hidden in the mountain, or had isolation fractured his mind beyond repair? The discovery of Daniel Reeves's backpack and journal should have ended the mystery. It should have given his family answers, his community closure, and the climbing world a tragic but familiar story, a mountaineer lost to the elements. Yet, what the journal revealed only deepened the unease. It did not explain the silence of 12 years. It did not clarify the shadow in the photograph or the carvings on the ridge. Instead, it left behind a story that refused to sit comfortably in either fact or folklore. The community split almost immediately. Skeptics leaned towards science. They argued that Daniel's notes were the writings of a man pushed beyond his limits. Altitude sickness, they explained, could cause hallucinations, voices in the wind, lights on the horizon, even the feeling of being followed. The carvings in fire pits, they said, could be explained by other climbers who had passed through the region at different times. As for the shadow in the photograph, it was a trick of perspective, a boulder mistaken for a figure, enhanced by a desperate imagination searching for meaning. But others were not so easily convinced. For believers, the evidence told a different story. The preservation of the backpack suggested it had been hidden, not abandoned. The carvings found nearby were too deliberate, too unsettling in form, to be dismissed as coincidence. The fresh ash in the fire pits suggested activity long after Daniel was presumed gone, and his words, "Not alone up here," were repeated enough to feel intentional. A message for whoever found the journal. Debates raged in town halls, on climbing forums, and in hushed conversations around campfires. Some said Daniel had witnessed something real, something human or otherwise, that lived in the upper reaches of the silent peak. Others whispered of the stone circle he described, claiming it was no natural formation, but something built long ago, with a purpose no one dared to name. The mountain itself became a monument to the divide. Its old name was slowly replaced. Locals, then climbers, and eventually even maps began to call it Reeves Peak. It was both an honor and a warning, a reminder of the man who vanished, and of the secrets that remained unanswered. As more climbers returned, drawn by curiosity as much as challenge, new stories emerged. Compasses failed inexplicably near the ridges, needles spinning without cause. Even when skies were clear, drone operators complained of batteries draining in minutes, far faster than expected. Their machines falling from the air as though the mountain itself rejected being observed. Campers spoke of footsteps crunching in snow outside their tents. But when they looked, no one was there. Some swore they heard voices carried on the wind, their own names whispered back to them. These reports piled up, passed between climbers as cautionary tales. Some laughed them off as exaggerations. Others avoided Reeves Peak entirely, convinced it was a place where normal rules did not apply. For Daniel's family, the mystery never truly ended. His sister carried on the tradition she had begun in the early years. Each September, she returned to the base of the peak. She placed flowers at the trailhead, sometimes speaking aloud to him, sometimes standing in silence. As years passed, others joined her, fellow climbers, strangers who had followed the story, locals who still whispered about the silent peak. For her, it was not about answers anymore. It was about remembrance. Yet, even remembrance was not free of unease. 3 years after the backpack was found, another drone operator sent his camera soaring along one of the peak's lesser-known ledges. The footage began normally, sweeping shots of stone walls and patches of ice. But as the drone tilted upward, its lens caught something etched into the rock. Carvings, not the crude humanoid shapes discovered earlier, but letters, 2 initials, D, R, and beneath them, a date. The date was not from the year of his disappearance. It was not from the years immediately after. It was marked 3 years later. The discovery sent shockwaves through the climbing community. Had someone carved it as a hoax to fuel the legend of Reeves Peak? Or had Daniel survived longer than anyone ever imagined, leaving behind his name as proof? If the latter was true, then what had happened to him after. The footage was studied endlessly, slowed down, enhanced, debated. Some claimed the carvings were weathered and could not possibly be recent. Others argued they were too sharp, too clean, to be dismissed as old. But no one could explain how they had appeared where no climber had ventured, on a ledge so dangerous it was rarely even seen. For Daniel's sister, it was both a gift and a torment, proof that her brother might have lived longer than she had believed, and a cruel reminder that his fate still remained unknown. She returned to the mountain again that year, placing flowers not just at the trailhead, but at the base of the slope that led toward the ridge. And so the legacy of Reeves Peak continued, a place where a climber vanished, where silence lasted for years, where evidence surfaced only to deepen the mystery, a place where science and myth collided, leaving those who heard the story unsure which to believe. Because some places do not just claim lives, they keep secrets until they choose to be seen.